So I will be moderating this panel, and the panel members are Tanisha, Sara, and Anne. I welcome you all to the intern panel. Are you all ready for our discussion? Great. So let's begin with the first question. Was there any safeguarding policy at your previous place of education or employment? If yes, were you made aware of it and were you happy that it was followed over there?
So I'd like to go first. So when it comes to safeguarding policies, I think there were mainly two instances where I was like properly informed of such a policy being alive, which was first back in high school, and the other was here in university. So we're like briefed about the sort of rights that and protections that we have, how to go about approaching or who to approach when certain incidents or approaches happen. So I think those were the only two instances where I have been aware of. So I have interned in a couple of organizations before, and I'll be honest, as freshers or as interns, getting an internship or a job itself is a huge thing. So, what a lot of us do is we don't even read through the terms of conditions. We immediately sign our signature or sign our names there and we submit it without being aware of the fact that whether there is a safeguarding policy there or whether there isn't. And only in one of the organizations that I interned in, I was actually briefed that such a thing existed before starting my internships, but never have I ever been aware, possibly because of my own lack of consciousness for not checking the contract, but also because I've just never been aware if there was such a policy in place.
Sarah, is your answer related to Tanisha, or do you have a different answer from what she said?
More or less the same. I'd speak about the university I'm in right now. So there we have juniors, we have seniors. So we have a lot of policies in place, such as the anti-dragging policy that is very important, and it is emphasized from the beginning, from the start of admission all the way till you finish it. So I feel that's very important because it lets like the students also feel safe and secure that they're entering a place where they can study peacefully, and if God forsake something happens, they will be looked after. So there are sexual harassment policies as well, and for those, of course, the policies are emphasized over and over again. Moreover, there are videos also where they inform the students and the faculty of what is considered sexual harassment, and not just all the basic that we see, but any form of like language or certain actions that can be considered as a sexual harassment. So I feel like it has been really good in terms of the safeguarding policy they have in place and how to make sure everyone's aware of it.
And do you have a similar experience to what Tanisha and Sarah said, or do you have something else to add on to?
I don't have much else to add on since I have also like signed up for several places to work and intern in, and they all have safeguarding policies, but that's all on paper since none of them try to introduce us to their policies, or do they ever tell us that the policies do exist. So yeah, I, we weren't told about it.
Yeah, I think that aligns with what Tanisha and Sarah said. Moving on to the next question. As an intern, why do you think it's important that an organization you work with has a safeguarding policy? And do you want to go first?
Definitely. This is a great question. So, as an intern, in my opinion, I think that it is definitely important that an organization I work with has a safeguarding policy. Is because, first of all, safeguarding policies exist mainly to protect people, like especially vulnerable adults or vulnerable people of under 18 years old. Um, Other than that, policies also exist to ensure that everyone is in the best state to work as as long as they feel comfortable and safe in their workspace. Um, and policies Well, the most important thing, like the most important reason as for why they exist, is because they ensure the safety and well-being of employees and interns. That's my opinion.
Yeah, great. Tanisha, do you want to add on to something that Anne said?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with whatever Anne has just talked about right now. Um, as mentioned before, like being new to the job scene as interns, we're not aware of what we're protected against. And I think it's so important to have such a policy, but within that policy being an implementation procedure wherein it is necessary to ensure that all interns or employees or people starting off are briefed about this. Because I think one of the other major issues to bring up is the fact that we aren't aware of such safeguarding policies. So I think it's important that there is such a policy that protects us from certain sexual advances, or let's say abrasive language or any sort of that, which I think especially as young professionals we could be really susceptible to.
Yeah, I think I completely agree to what you and Anne said. With that, we'll move on to the next question. Have you personally or someone you know have faced any barriers either in reporting or receiving support from the organization they have been associated with in regards to safeguarding policy? Sara, do you want to go first?
Okay, sure. So when I was working in Mozambique, and this was on-field work, so it was a very different experience than working online. So my colleague, who was also a high school graduate at the time, so we both were relatively new, and there was a lot of rude remarks disguised as constructive criticism, and it was really hard because there's no policy that says that. Constructive criticism can also have certain rules, certain ways you can say it. So, a body language, the way you say it, the words you use for your constructive criticism can have a really negative impact on the employee because your work starts going down, you're very anxious and you're nervous to even submit your work to begin with because you're not sure how the response is going to be. Because the tone of a person, of the way they give you the constructive criticism, can really affect you. So I feel there was a very thin line between constructive criticism and rude remarks, which we had to take to the HR, and the HR had to reevaluate that in what form can constructive criticism be given. And that was something new which they added, and I continued working there for the next 6 months, and I feel there was a big change. I feel even for the higher authority who was involved in it, he kind of sort of realized that yes, there is like a fine line, and being a little bit kind towards employees who are freshly graduates was important. So I feel, yeah, it does help in communicating with the HR, especially if they're involved and they're listening. And it's a problem which they never thought would come across. So I feel it was important.
I'd love to add on to what Sara has just said, and I think she's brought up a great point. So, when I first came across the safeguarding policy, or I thought about it, the only thing that came in my head was, oh, something regarding, inappropriate advances. But the point that Sara has mentioned, I think, is amazing, is because another thing about the safeguarding policy that needs to be kept within it is about the communication language, because a lot of certain, let's say, inappropriate remarks, or let's say even abrasive language, sometimes can be a very subtle way of bringing someone's motivation down. And I think it is so important to create certain guidelines to ensure that this miscommunication does not happen, and that certain instances that certain people are not let go of simply because it's not there within safeguarding policy. So it shouldn't safeguarding policy does not just contain just actions of inappropriate language or like actions, but also the kind of communication that a superior has with their junior and a junior has with their superior. Because especially in a place like India where there's sort of like a rigid hierarchy, as juniors or as interns we fall into being very docile to whoever's above us, so we don't speak out as much. We believe that, okay, this is the sort of language that is appropriate to being used to us. And so I think this is all I wanted to add on to.
I think miscommunication is a very important thing which can be added to safeguarding policy. With that being said, my next question is, what according to you are important aspects for an organization to keep in mind while designing a safeguarding policy for the interns? And do you want to go ahead with this?
Yes, definitely. So for this question, after reading quite a few of safeguarding policies from different places, I think that the first important thing for an organization to keep in mind when designing one is the safety of their employees, both interns, higher ups, board of executives, etc. Basically, people who work for them. Second of all, the safety of their targets. More specifically, it would be like um, the the safety of their customers, participants, or surveyors. Basically, people related to them, as in like using their service. Um, the third, it would be to respect their human rights of both the employees and people who they work for or people who use their services. And the last one of all, like, but it's not the least importance, is that organization's values. Yes.
Sara, Tanisha, do you want to add on to something that Anne said?
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead. So again, I agree with whatever Anna said, and adding on to that, I think one thing about a safeguarding policy that's important, it's not just identifying what is considered misappropriate, inappropriate, or unacceptable, but I think one of the most important aspects of a safeguarding policy is the implementation of how you go about protecting the individual that has been harmed and how you approach the situation. Because if something does happen, and if there's a lot of paperwork that is like occurring in the process of it, it could really discourage someone from coming up front and sort of losing hope midway. So I think a safeguarding policies, when it comes to an implementation aspect, needs to be robust so as to get all the necessary details to conduct a proper investigation, but also needs to be simple, brief, and short enough for the individual or the victim to easily be able to go through the process without being overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you when you said that the process shouldn't be long enough, because that could actually discourage someone from actually coming up with their problems because of the long paperwork. So yeah, I think that's a really great point which you and Anne brought up. With that being said, I have a last question to all three of you. Would you give priority to an organization with a safeguarding policy as opposed to one without?
Okay, I think so. I definitely give priority to an organization that does have a safeguarding policy in place, because it just provides a sense of security. Yes, like it may not always be used or whatsoever, but just knowing it's there, if for God forsake something happens, there is a system in place that can happen. Some people think organizations that have safeguarding policy or whatever, this might be a regular occurrence, but it's not the case. It is just a thing they have thought ahead of time that, okay, they care about their employees. It basically shows that. So organization that is looking after its employees before anything's happening, I feel it's really important to look for one.
I agree with whatever Sara has mentioned, and I will also say that I would choose an organization with a safeguarding policy over one that does not.
And
Me either, because with a safeguarding policy in place, it is definitely safer and a lot more comfortable for one to work in.
yeah, definitely. Given an option, if obviously even I would choose an organization which has a safeguarding policy. And with that being said, we come to an end of the discussion with the interns panel. Thank you, interns, for indulging in this discussion on the importance of a safeguarding policy from your perspective. I hope you all really found some insightful aspects from our discussion.